Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay Self-Reliance, first published in 1841, is a foundational work of American transcendentalism and a powerful declaration of individualism and nonconformity. Emerson argues that each person must trust their inner voice, remain true to their nature, and resist the pressure to conform to external expectations, societal norms, or historical traditions. Written in the wake of the American Romantic movement, Self-Reliance blends philosophy, poetic prose, and personal reflection, challenging the reader to liberate themselves from fear, imitation, and self-doubt. Overview of key ideas. Emerson's central ideas in Self-Reliance include the sanctity of the individual. The self is divine and must be honored. Trust in one's own intuition. Intuition is the highest source of knowledge. Nonconformity. Following society or tradition leads to spiritual death. The value of consistency. Emerson famously warns that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. The individual and the divine. Each person is a part of the universal soul, and self-reliance connects us to the divine order. Detailed summary, section by section. 1. The opening. Trust thyself. Summary. Emerson opens with the assertion that every person possesses a unique genius, a divine spark or insight, that they must trust and express. He criticizes people who are afraid to speak their thoughts because they fear contradiction or disapproval. Key quote. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. Analysis. This section lays the foundation for Emerson's main claim: self-trust is a moral imperative. By equating the self with a divine force, Emerson elevates intuition above logic or social proof. He invites readers to reclaim their originality and integrity, arguing that greatness comes from those who believe in their own ideas even when the world disagrees. 2. The problem with imitation and envy. Summary. Emerson warns against envy and imitation, claiming they are forms of ignorance and suicide. Trying to be someone else is an abdication of one's unique self. Key quote. Envy is ignorance, imitation is suicide. Analysis. This segment critiques the tendency to compare oneself to others. Emerson sees imitation as a betrayal of the self, rooted in a failure to recognize the sufficiency of one's own experience. He encourages readers to recognize that all great achievements stem from self-expression, not from conformity. 3. Society as the enemy of individuality. Summary. Society demands conformity, which Emerson views as a threat to the soul. He argues that social institutions, churches, governments, schools, value order over truth and demand people suppress their originality for the sake of acceptance. Key quote. Society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. Analysis. Emerson's critique of society is radical. He sees social norms as coercive, designed to stifle the individual in favor of mediocrity. True self-reliance, he claims, requires a willingness to resist societal pressure, even if that resistance makes one unpopular or misunderstood. 4. The pitfalls of consistency. Summary. Many fear inconsistency and contradiction. Emerson refutes this fear, arguing that changing one's mind is a sign of growth, not weakness. Key quote. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Analysis. Emerson encourages readers to be spontaneous and honest, even if their views change from day to day. He holds up Socrates, Jesus, and Galileo as examples of those who trusted their truth over prevailing opinion. Consistency, if it means repeating the same ideas regardless of new insight, is the enemy of enlightenment. 5. Individual greatness and nonconformity. Summary. All great men and women, Emerson asserts, have been nonconformists. They trusted their own voice and were often misunderstood in their time, but ultimately became moral and intellectual leaders. Key quote. To be great is to be misunderstood. Analysis. By referencing figures like Pythagoras, Luther, Copernicus, and Newton, Emerson aligns individual insight with historical transformation. He argues that genius lies in being misunderstood, and that the desire for universal approval must be overcome in order to live fully. 6. The value of present experience. Summary. Emerson argues against reliance on past tradition or future promise. He urges individuals to embrace the present moment and act from their current convictions, rather than merely repeating what others have said. Key quote. Man postpones or remembers, he does not live in the present. Analysis. This section reflects Emerson's transcendental belief that truth is not in the past or future but is available now, through the individual soul. His emphasis on present awareness anticipates later existentialist and even mindfulness philosophies. 7. Property and self-reliance. Summary. Material property is meaningless without personal virtue. Emerson condemns those who value wealth over character and who cling to possessions instead of living freely. Key quote. But a cultivated man becomes ashamed of his property, out of new respect for his nature. Analysis. Here, Emerson critiques materialism and external success, arguing that the truly self-reliant person is indifferent to wealth and status. He affirms a spiritual and ethical economy, where value is measured not in possessions but in authentic expression and moral force. 8. The power of the soul. Summary. In closing, Emerson asserts that the soul knows no bounds and that each individual has access to universal truth through introspection. The divine is not in churches or scriptures but within the human heart. Key quote. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. Analysis. This final note unifies Emerson's philosophy. Self-reliance is not selfishness, but spiritual self-realization. Peace and truth are found not through obedience or external validation, but through honest, principled living. He ends by affirming the supremacy of moral integrity over any worldly reward. Major themes. 1. Individualism and nonconformity. At the core of self-reliance is the belief that each person must live according to their own nature and not the expectations of others. Emerson's call to nonconformity is a rejection of the herd mentality and a defense of personal sovereignty. He believes that greatness emerges when people are true to themselves, even if that truth contradicts convention, tradition, or social norms. 2. Intuition and inner voice. Emerson elevates intuition over reason, faith over conformity. He insists that truth is self-evident and accessible to all, not merely to intellectuals or institutions. This emphasis aligns with transcendentalism, which sees the soul as a direct channel to the divine, making each person capable of independent revelation. 3. The divinity of the self. To Emerson, the individual soul is sacred. He does not promote arrogance, but rather a kind of spiritual humility. A recognition that within each of us resides a fragment of the divine. Thus, to honor oneself is to honor God, and to betray oneself is to betray the spiritual order of the universe. 4. The critique of society. Emerson paints society as a corrupting force that rewards obedience and punishes originality. His portrait of social institutions is sharp. They demand compromise, suppress creativity, and instill fear of judgment. He sees self-reliance as a form of moral resistance, a refusal to allow external forces to dictate one's thoughts or values. 5. The value of spontaneity and contradiction. Rather than advocating a fixed dogma, Emerson urges readers to embrace fluidity and growth. One's views may change with experience, and that's not hypocrisy, but maturity. Consistency, when demanded for its own sake, becomes a prison. Emerson instead celebrates those who speak new truths, even if they clash with yesterday's ideas. Philosophical and historical context. Transcendentalism. Emerson was a leading figure in American transcendentalism, a 19th-century movement rooted in Romanticism. Unitarianism. Eastern philosophy. German idealism. Transcendentalists believed in the inherent goodness of people and nature, the value of personal insight, and the immanence of the divine in everyday life. Self-Reliance articulates this worldview in secular and spiritual terms, emphasizing independence, authenticity, and moral intuition. American identity and democratic spirit. Written during a period of national expansion and intellectual awakening, Self-Reliance also serves as a manifesto of American democratic individualism. It champions the common person's capacity for greatness, rejecting old-world hierarchies, inherited tradition, and clerical authority. Emerson's voice is at once spiritual and civic, inviting each reader to become a self-governing individual. Style and rhetorical strategies. 1. Aphoristic style. Emerson's essay is rich in memorable one-liners, many of which have become maxims. To be great is to be misunderstood. Trust thyself. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. These aphorisms make his argument memorable, punchy, and broadly applicable. 2. Use of classical and religious allusions. Emerson references Greek philosophers, Christian saints, and Enlightenment thinkers, tying his message to universal spiritual and moral traditions. Yet he subverts religious authority by emphasizing personal revelation over Scripture. 3. Use of metaphor and analogy. Emerson frequently uses natural imagery, rivers, trees, seasons, to express abstract ideas. These metaphors connect the internal world of the self with the external world of nature, reinforcing the transcendental idea that truth is embedded in all things. 4. Persuasive appeals. He uses a mix of emotional appeals, pathos, ethical appeals, ethos, and logical reasoning, logos. However, his main strategy is inspirational exhortation. He is less interested in arguing and more in awakening. Criticism and limitations. Though widely celebrated, Self-Reliance has been critiqued for elitism. Critics argue Emerson assumes a level of privilege that ignores social and economic realities. Individualism at the expense of community. His insistence on self-trust can be read as socially isolating or naively optimistic. Vagueness. Emerson's style can be opaque or abstract, requiring close and repeated reading. Yet these critiques do not erase the essay's enduring influence as a work of moral empowerment and intellectual provocation. Conclusion. Self-Reliance remains one of the most influential essays in American intellectual history. It is at once a personal challenge, a philosophical treatise, and a poetic anthem to the individual spirit. Emerson's call to trust oneself, to resist conformity, and to live from within has inspired generations of thinkers, writers, activists, and everyday readers seeking authentic lives in a world full of noise. Insist on yourself, never imitate. In that simple command lies a profound challenge: to live deliberately, truthfully, and freely, not as a shadow of others' expectations, but as a fully realized self. A flame lit by the spark of one's own divinity.